Well, good morning again. If I had had a chance to meet you, I'm Scott Hickox. I'm the lead pastor here at the Journey West County. And as John said, we're continuing in this series in the book of Proverbs. It's really a wonderful book in the Bible, and Proverbs is full of wisdom for us. It doesn't give us answer to all of life's questions. It doesn't tell us what to do in every situation. But what it does do is it gives us principles. And if we begin to practice these principles, then we begin to actually grow in wisdom. And frankly, the principles that Proverbs give us address some of the everyday things we face in life. That's what we've been looking at in this series. And as you just saw from the video, today we're going to talk about work. Our hope is that in this series, as we gain some wisdom, that we'll actually be sent out of the church and into the world. That this book will help prepare us to go out of this place and into the world. And I think as we grow in wisdom, we're going to be better prepared to interact with the world around us. And where do we spend a lot of time in the world around us? We spend a lot of time at work, right? Statistics say that we'll spend on average between 80 and 90,000 hours at work in our lifetime. That's a lot. Now, when I talk about work today, let me just say this. I don't simply mean where you get paid. It's not just your job. It certainly might include that, but when I talk about work today, I want you to think about where you invest your time. Maybe you're a student. Maybe you're a retiree. Whatever it is, wherever you invest your time. Maybe you're a parent or a caregiver. I want you to think more broadly about work this morning. Because we spend a lot of time there, right? 80 to 90,000 hours we're going to spend at work. And there's a Gallup poll that said that 77% of people are dissatisfied with their job. Now, if you put those two things together, that's not a very good picture, is it? Because what it says is that most people are unhappy where they spend most of their time. That's not a very good combination. Surely it seems like God must have something to say to us about work. And the good news is He does have something to say about it. He has a lot to say about work in its various forms in the Bible is referenced more than 800 times. That's more than all the words used to express worship, music, praise, and singing combined, over 800 times. The good news is we're not going to look at all those this morning, all right? We'll just look at a few. We're in the book of Proverbs. We're actually going to jump around in the Bible, look at some different things that the Bible has to say about that. Before we start, though, I want us to just think about work for a moment. Think about a day at work, maybe even recently, okay? Maybe your alarm went off. Maybe it didn't go off. But from the very beginning of the day, you just knew the day was going to be a battle. It was going to be a hard day. You get up, you stub your toe, you go to the kitchen, there's no coffee, you burn the toast. Your kids, if you have kids, they act like they've never gotten dressed on their own before. You finally get out of the house and immediately you're in traffic. You hit every red light. You show up to work late, only to find out the boss has moved the deadline up to noon. Your coworkers aren't cooperating. The printer is jammed. By noon, you're ready to tap out. You're ready to be done. By the time the day is over, you're just thankful that it's over. Have you ever had one of those kind of days? You have one of those kind of days and you think it's almost like work is cursed. And in fact, it is. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But here's where I hope we're going to go this morning. I want us to see three things as we talk about this idea of work. We're going to start by looking at the design of work. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the dangers of work. And by the time we get to the end, I'm hoping, we'll see, but I'm hoping that we'll actually be able to talk about the delight of work. So let's begin with the design. And if we're going to talk about the design of work, frankly, we just go back to the beginning of the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, the very first words of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning, God created." It's fascinating, really, when you think about that. It wasn't just God sitting around majestic in the heavens. He actually did something. He created something. He fashioned heaven and earth. And so from the very beginning of history, we're faced with this inescapable conclusion that God Himself is a worker. That it's part of His character, it's part of His nature, it's who He is. And the same word that is applied to God in Genesis chapter 1 is actually applied to us as human beings in Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis 2:15, it says Adam was put in the garden to work the ground and to keep it. We were made to do that, to work. Now, do you remember, if you know this story at all, do you remember the word that God used to describe creation? He was creating all kinds of things in Genesis chapter 1. We're told that, and he uses a word to describe it. What word did he use to describe that? Good, right? He said his creation was good. Now, I think that's important for us to remember. God said his creation was good. He didn't say it was perfect. And you see, there's a distinction. Perfect means perfect. It means it can't be improved upon. God said his creation was good. And so what I want us to do is think about creation sort of like it was in a raw state. He created it in such a way that man and woman could come and develop it and cultivate it. In fact, that's what the word literally means. It means to prepare or to develop. It's like bringing something into its potential. That's what it means to create or to work. It's seeing something and then working on it so that you see something greater happen. I mean, that's why we do things. That's why Home Depot exists, right? I mean, we want to make things better. We want to fix things. We want to improve things. And if we can't do it, we want Chip and Joanna Gaines to show up and do it for us, right? Adam's work in the garden can be seen, I think, as a metaphor for all of our work. Because what we see in creation is God bringing order out of chaos. And that's what a gardener does. A gardener does the same thing by creatively using all the materials at their disposal, and they rearrange them, and they produce additional usable resources for the rest of mankind. God made Adam, and he made us to be gardeners. He made Adam to take the raw materials and to develop them for the glory of God and for the good of others. And that's, I think, what he has called us to do as well. He's made us to do that. He's made us to work. Now, if you know the story in the book of Genesis, it goes on. God put man and woman in the garden. They were going to work it and keep it. And then he goes on and he says, be fruitful and multiply. You see, God had left some of creation undone because he wanted them to work. What he wanted them to do actually was to sort of press out around the globe. He wanted them to create cultures and cities and art and technology. And all those things were to be an expression of our work. Again, if you know the story, Adam and Eve are in the garden and things are going they're going pretty well, frankly, until Genesis chapter 3. And if you know the story in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve rebelled and they disobeyed God. And it's there that God declares a curse on his creation. From now on, he says the ground is going to be cursed. It's going to produce thorns and thistles. You're going to have to sweat to get food out of it, he says. He says there's going to be pain in childbirth from now on. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, I get it now. It makes sense. Work is a curse. But you see, work is not a curse. Remember, Genesis 2 comes before Genesis chapter 3. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence there, but that's an important thing for us to remember. Remember in Genesis chapter 2, God put Adam in the garden to do what? To work. That was before the fall. That was before the curse. Work was good. It was designed by God to be good. But now, work is broken. And the things that we work with are broken. That's where printer jams and computer viruses come from. The curse, right? But more than that, seriously, there are difficult relationships at work. There's stress associated with work, and all those things go back to the fall. Because from the very beginning, God designed work, and he designed it to be good. He created us to work. It was good. And I just wonder, I don't know how often, I can just confess for me, I don't often think about work in those terms. But that's how God created it to be. He designed it to be good, for our good and for the good of the world. From the very beginning, he designed work to bring order out of chaos, to build upon the creative work that he had already done. See, we were created in the image of God, and one of the ways that we image God is in how we work. But because work is broken, we often respond to work in broken ways. And we don't experience all the joy that God has for us in work as a result of this curse that we just talked about. And so I want to take some time and just look at some of the dangers of work. Because of the fall, there are a lot of dangers associated with this good thing that God made of work. But we only have time to talk about a couple, so we're going to talk about two of the dangers of work. They are, I would call them sort of dangerous extremes that we are tempted to fall into in our work. And they're idleness and idolatry. Again, keep in mind as we talk about these things that this is not necessarily what you get paid to do, okay? Think more broadly as you think about your work. But the question I want you to be thinking about as I talk about these dangers is, in my work, in my parenting, in my serving, whatever it is that you do, am I someone who is more prone to idleness or to idolatry? Think about that question as we talk about these things. We'll start with idleness. And the passage that you just heard read speaks to this idea of idleness. In the book of Proverbs, again, this can be some of your homework, spend some more time in Proverbs, but Proverbs talks a lot about idleness. And one of the reasons it does, I believe, is ever since the fall, we've been sort of inventing ways to get out of work. I think that's just who we are as human beings. We have lots of creative excuses. I'll tell you a brief story. I'm not really proud to share this with you, but I want to tell you. When I was in college, I was working on my master's degree, and I needed to work while I was going to school, and a friend of mine's dad happened to run the GE plant in Springfield. We made little small electric motors for washing machines and for dryers, and the factory ran 2 shifts all week, but they couldn't quite keep up. There was this one machine that wouldn't keep up, and so they needed to run that on the weekends. And so he hired a buddy of mine and me to work on the weekends to run this machine. And he said you can work up to 24 hours in a weekend. And I can't remember exactly. I think he paid us like $9 or $10 an hour, which that was 30 years ago. It was a lot of money. It was a good job. I mean, we were excited about it. And so our plan was we'd go in at 5 a.m. on Saturdays and we'd work till 5 p.m. We'd get 12 hours in on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we'd try and work 8 or 10 as much as we could. We wanted to make as much money as we could. There's just one problem. On the weekends, there was no one in the factory but us, okay? There was a security guy that rode a bike around every once in a while, but other than that, it was us. And we sort of, over time, it didn't take us long to figure out how to run this machine, how to punch out enough shells that we needed. And so pretty soon, we would come and clock in at 5 a.m., and we would walk across the street to McDonald's, and we'd have breakfast, and we'd read the paper, and we'd spend an hour or two there before we would go back to the plant. And we'd come back and we'd work a little bit longer. And then if the weather was nice, we'd take the forklifts out back and race in the parking lot. And then we'd come back in and maybe work a little bit more. Listen, we were terrible employees. We were lazy. We made idleness into an art form. That's what we did. Again, I'm not proud to say that, and hopefully you're saying, man, Scott, that is bad. I would never do that. Hopefully you wouldn't do that. But listen, I want to just make us pause for a second and ask the question, because I fear we do it in other ways. We talked a bit about this a few weeks ago, but maybe you're not racing the forklift in the parking lot, okay? But how often do you check your personal email at work? How often are you checking into your Facebook account at work? And I know that's important because I know your friend might have just taken that survey about which state they should live in, and they might post the results, and you really need to see that, right? I mean, that is important. I get it. But how much time do we spend doing that? You see, maybe we're not lazy. Maybe we're just really distracted at work. Again, I talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about integrity, if you remember the studies I quoted. But this one study, 90% of people admitted to wasting time at work. 90%. And over 50% of them admitted to wasting more than an hour, 1 to 4 hours a day. Over 50% of the people admitted to that. Now listen, the Proverbs has a name for us. The word it uses is sluggard. I don't know about you, it's not a word I use very often. I don't even know what it means, but it's not a very flattering word picture when I read it. I mean, look at that. That's what the author of Proverbs says we're like when we're idle at work. Proverbs 6:6 says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." He says, come on, you slug. Look at the ant. Look at how she works. Again, Proverbs has a lot to say about idleness and uses this word sluggard a lot. One of my favorites is in Proverbs 26. The author there says in verse 15, "A sluggard buries his hand in the dish He's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. This dude is too lazy to eat. I mean, that is not a very attractive picture. And you see what the Proverbs tell us is that idleness actually has consequences. It will lead to things. If you go on back in Proverbs chapter 6, how long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. You see, there are consequences to our idleness, to our laziness, to our distractedness, however you describe that. I think it's interesting the author says a little sleep and a little slumber, because I think the author knows how we tend to think. We can rationalize almost anything. I mean, it's just a little, right? It's just, I'm just clicking over there just for a minute to look at this. I'm just going to take a little bit longer lunch break. Listen to this. I think we don't often realize the impact this behavior has on us. Think about this. If you waste just 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. Now keep in mind the survey I just quoted, over 50% of the people said they waste more than an hour a day. But if you waste just 30 minutes a day, that adds up to 135 hours in a year. That's an additional 3 weeks paid vacation that you just stole from your employer or from the people that you serve. You see, our actions have consequences. And so the Proverbs wants us to see this. It paints this picture. And it talks about the sluggard as one who is resentful, who whines, who is unappreciative, who is lazy. I don't know what this says about us men, but it's always in the masculine. The sluggard is always a man. I'm sure women, you struggle with this too. I don't know what the feminine of sluggard is. Maybe it's sluggardess. I don't know. You can look that up. But whatever the word is, there is a danger here for us in our work. And I want us just to be honest with ourselves and ask the question. Again, some of us may struggle with just being lazy. Maybe we just avoid work. Some of us may be distracted. I don't know what it is, but whatever the root cause of it is, idleness is a danger that keeps us from experiencing all that God has for us in work. And so I think we need to be aware. So if idleness is on one extreme, then on the other extreme is idolatry. That's where we run to work, right? We love work. We're prone to be workaholics. We love the money. We love the success. We love the power, the prestige, whatever comes with that. That's what we love. We find our identity in our work. And listen, this is hard to fight against because our culture sort of just reinforces it, right? I mean, when we meet someone, after we ask their name, what's the next question we ask? What do you do, right? I mean, we are identified by what we do. And for many of us, that's a struggle. We can be prone to worship work. Proverbs 23 says this, do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone. For suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. The author is saying, don't labor, don't work so hard for something, because the reality is it likely could just go away. And he says don't toil after wealth, but you could fill in the blank. That could be success, that could be power, that could be a degree, that could be anything that you're running after, you're chasing after. Because here's the reality. I mean, you might get the promotion and then get laid off. I mean, all that money you're saving for retirement, it could get wiped out in a stock market crash or in a health crisis. I mean, we can give ourselves to things that really won't be there in the end. And that happens when we are idolatrous in our work, when we make work an idol for us. I think one of the ways just to test yourself, a question you can ask to see if maybe you tend towards this struggle, just ask yourself the question, can I walk away from it? Can I rest from it? I mean, think about idolatry as the opposite extreme of idleness. Idleness is an overvaluing of rest, and idolatry is an undervaluing of rest. Those are the two extremes. And you see, here's the challenge, I think, for our culture, maybe particularly here in West County. I think idolatry in our work is so seductive because laziness, idleness, I mean, you just saw the picture of the slug, right? Not very attractive. In our culture, laziness has a connotation. It's not very positive. We have a negative connotation of idleness. But hard work and determination, people that'll do whatever it takes, that's what gets valued in our culture. Those are esteemed in our culture. So you can see how seductive it can be to make work an idol for us. And if we're not careful, we can begin to worship our work. Again, that question I just asked, can you rest? Can you walk away? There's a recent study that says over 50% of American workers don't take all of their allotted vacation time. This is work they're guaranteed. Legally, it's theirs, and they don't take it. And over half the people that even do take it admit to checking emails and phone calls while they're on vacation. See, I think that's rooted in our idolatry. We put so much value on work. Frankly, we put so much value on ourselves. We think we are so important, and what others think of us is so important. We think the world can't go on without us. Listen, a friend of mine just wrote a blog last week and was talking about his vacation and how he unplugged. And here's my encouragement to you. Take a vacation and completely unplug. And I'll make this promise. The world will go on without you. I promise. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. Here's the truth. You're really not that important. It's okay. We have to be okay with that. Now, I know when we talk about idolatry, and if you've been in church a while, you've heard us talk about it. And I think when we talk about making work an idol, we are prone to think about the businessman or businesswoman that works 80 hours a week, that's always on call at the office, that's always working. And that's certainly an application. I'm not saying that's not real. That is real, okay? So if that's where you are, you need to receive what the Lord has for you in that this morning. But there's another application I want to lean into this morning. I'm going to take a risk a bit this morning. Remember what I said, that work is not necessarily what you get paid to do, okay? And I want to say a word to moms this morning. Listen, when I think about these dangers of work, when I think about you moms, laziness is not something I worry about. I don't worry about idleness. I'm not concerned that you're sitting around at home eating bonbons, playing video games. I mean, that's not your challenge, I don't think. If it is, we can talk about that. But I am concerned that sometimes your work, being a mom, whether you work outside the home or not, but your work as a mom can become an idol for you. I mean, I want you to be honest with yourself this morning. Just ask the question, is my identity rooted in my kids? I mean, the same question I asked earlier. Are you able to take a rest? Now, I realize for some of you, there may be some of you, just because of your situation, that you can't actually take a rest. And if that's where you are, I'd love to talk to you. We have deacons, we have people we would love to help serve you in that way. But many of you, you have the option. And my question is, do you take it? Are you willing to take a rest? Or have you convinced yourself and others that you're the only one that can do this? Is your identity tied to how your kids behave or how they perform? Is your identity tied to the fact that your kids need you more than anyone else? Are you so busy being super mom that there's no time or energy left for your husband or your neighbor or your church? Listen, all of us can struggle with making work an idol. It's not necessarily what we get paid to do, but whatever it is we invest our time in, whatever we spend our life doing can become an idol if we're not careful. Even good things. And I think that's what Solomon's saying in Proverbs 23. He's warning us against putting anything in the place of Jesus. That's when it becomes idolatry. When we put anything there, even good things, even work, even kids, whatever that is, if we put them in the place of Jesus, we will ultimately be disappointed. Because nothing else satisfies. So idleness and idolatry, two dangers for us to avoid. There, again, I'm envisioning them like two ditches on either side of the road. There are these extremes that we can fall into. See, the idle person wants to rest. And they take the good gift of rest and they worship it and then they avoid the responsibility to work. And the idolater loves work and takes the good gift of work and begins to worship it and rejects the responsibility to rest. And so the question I want us to think about this morning is just where are you most tempted? Which ditch are you veering towards this morning? If we're honest, we bounce back and forth between them oftentimes, but where are you today and where are you most prone to be tempted? Those are two dangers of our work. Now, I want to take the remainder of our time, and what I want to do, I hope, is to actually talk about the delight of work. And I know that might seem like a foreign concept to some of you, but I'm hoping that maybe before we're done, that you might actually see that. And I think the Proverbs actually helps us see how it's actually possible. If you go back to Proverbs chapter 6, at the beginning, he says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest." So think about what's happening here in the proverb. The ant doesn't have a boss. It's kind of like me in the factory, but the ant works a little differently than I did. See, even though there's no boss, the ant is still motivated to work. She doesn't care that nobody is watching. She doesn't need to be noticed at all, actually. She isn't working for approval. She has a different motivation in her work. And I think that's what we so often miss. And yet I think it's critical for our understanding. Listen, before you are ever called to a job, you're called to Jesus. That's our first calling. Before you're ever called to a job, you're called to Jesus. And I think oftentimes when we talk about this, we start talking about vocation and about work, about parenting, about whatever it is where we spend our time, whatever we're called to do. And those things are important. But before that is our calling to Jesus. You see, here's how Jesus in the gospel frees us really to delight in work, to work in a different way than we ever have before. He gives the contrary message to what the world tells us. The world, culture, probably even your boss tells you, try harder, do more, be better. That's the message of our culture. That's the message of work that we hear. But that's not what Jesus says. Actually, Jesus says the opposite. He says, I came down to work for you. I came down to live my life for you. I went to the cross for you. I took the punishment for the sins that you should have been punished for. I took it myself, and I did all this because I love you. See, the good news of the gospel is that if you believe that truth, you can rest in Jesus. Because you're fully loved, you're completely forgiven, you are unconditionally accepted because of what Jesus has done, because of the work He's done for you. And the Bible makes glorious promises as a result of that. We're now His children. We're entitled to an inheritance. We're entitled to everything that Jesus deserves. We get because of Him. See, our identity is no longer in what we do, but in what Jesus has already done. You see, when our identity is in what you do, the focus is always on you, isn't it? The focus is always on you. But when Jesus is our identity, we can actually stop worrying about ourselves. We can actually be free then to love and to serve other people. We begin to see work as an avenue to love and to serve others. And I think when we begin to understand this, when we begin to rest in this, it becomes the foundation of who we are and how we live. 1 Corinthians 7:17 says this, "Only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him." I mean, that is a beautiful verse there. Every person is uniquely gifted, uniquely called by God. Everyone. You are unique. God has made you. He has wired you in certain ways to do certain things, and He wants you to do those things for His glory and for the good of other people. Again, keep in mind, maybe not what you get paid to do. I think one of the reasons we struggle with this is sometimes we just believe the lie that what we do is not that important. That our work is not that important. Other people do the important work. I just have to do this work. And I think it happens in the church as well. Some of you have believed the lie that the job I have is more important than the job you have. That somehow pastors and teachers, or whatever, that we're sort of the varsity and everyone else is the JV. Listen, that is a lie from the enemy. That is nowhere in the Bible. We are all created uniquely and gifted uniquely, and He's called us into all kinds of different things. I mean, you know the first person in the Bible the first person we're ever told in the Bible who's filled with the Spirit of God, you know who that is? Some of you, you're thinking back, you're thinking those stories, maybe Abraham, maybe Moses, maybe David. None of them. It's actually that famous biblical character, Bezalel. Remember him? That great VBS story, remember that? That's your homework. You can go to Exodus 35. Read about him. Listen, you're probably thinking, okay, I don't know who this guy is, but certainly he was probably a king. He was a priest. He was a prophet. What was he? Scott, tell us what he was. He was a craftsman. He was an artist. The first person we're told in the Bible filled with the Spirit of God is an artist. He goes on to make things in the construction of the tabernacle. The first person in the Bible filled with the Spirit of God is an artist. We need artists. See, every job matters to God. There's no distinction in the Bible between secular and sacred work, between important work and unimportant work. All work is important to God, and it's to be done to His glory. Elizabeth Elliot, the wife of Jim Elliot, she's an author. She used to say that every time she would see someone comb hair, she couldn't think of Genesis 1, order out of chaos. Every time someone mopped the floor, she would say, order out of chaos. You see, we're joining with God in being gardeners. Whatever you're doing, even if it's the smallest of activities, all of them can be done to the glory of God. Now, having said that, there are some vocations that can't glorify God. I mean, you simply can't glorify God as a heroin dealer, as a pimp, or as a Chicago Cub. There are just some things that can't glorify God, okay? But the list is small. And outside of those few exceptions, all work can be done to His glory. All work. We've misled you in the church. I mean, the church at large. So often we talk about serving God. Come work in Journey Kids, work, make coffee, come to church and serve God. Listen, that's part of it, but that's a small part of it. We serve God when we go from this place, when we go out into the marketplace, in all the various places that God has called you. That's when we serve God. So what does it look like to be a Christian worker? How do we bring God into the marketplace? Again, I think as followers of Jesus, we have messed this up in the past. We think, well, if we put our Bible on our desk, if we have a fish screensaver, maybe we say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays at work, we've done something, you know? Dorothy Sayers says this. She's an English author. She's one of C.S. Lewis's favorites. She said this about what it means to be a Christian at work. She said, the church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. You see, that's what it means to serve the Lord. You do your job with excellence, whatever it is. That's how you image God in the workplace, in the marketplace. Again, we've messed that up. We've convinced you that it means to come here on Sunday and serve Him. That's not it at all. It's to go from here and to serve Him. Work hard, work with excellence. I believe that's one of the best apologetics that we have in the world. Paul says that in Colossians 3, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ, he says. Now, I realize some of you are probably saying at this point, okay, that sounds really good, Scott, but you don't know where I work. You don't know my boss. And you're right, I don't know your boss. But what I do know is the context that Paul writes. Paul writes about work a lot. He writes to people who work a lot. And you know who his primary audience is? Many times he's writing to slaves. People who work in a pretty crummy work environment. And I think that's why he says we can work for the Lord and not for men. We're serving Jesus in our work. How you work is critical, I believe, to how people actually see Jesus. I'm not suggesting that you don't talk about Jesus at work. I pray God would give you those opportunities, but here's what I believe. I think how you work is what he'll use to give you those opportunities. How you work before a watching world is a tremendous testimony to the greatness of God. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. We're called to do our work to the glory of God. The Summit Church in North Carolina, I love, they say this about work and about calling. They say, do what you do for the glory of God and do it somewhere strategic for the mission of God. You know, how often do we think about a new opportunity? How often do we think about a job and we think about how much money we can make, or is it in a place where I want to live? But what if instead of asking the questions of how much money will I make or where do I most want to live, what if we begin asking where would I be most effective for mission? What if as a church we begin asking that question about our work? God, where are you calling me? I want to go where I can have the greatest impact for mission, not where I can make the most money. What a difference that would make. And I would just challenge you, if you're willing to ask that question, if you're willing to seriously ask the question, God, where could I have the most impact for mission? As you ask that question, just realize that the opportunities are beyond the borders of this country. God might be calling you to take your vocation, to take your work to places where a pastor or a missionary could never go. When it comes to work, I believe how you do it and where you do it are far more important than what you do. How you do it and where you do it are more important than what you do. Work is a gift. It's good. It doesn't matter who you are. Your work matters to God. I mean, you might be here this morning, not a follower of Jesus, maybe just checking out this whole Christianity thing. That's great. We are so glad that you're here. You may not understand some of this talk I've said about having your identity in Jesus. We'd love to talk to you about that. But what I want you to know is regardless, God still cares about you and he still cares about your work. For those of you who are followers of Jesus, just remember that he is the one that worked on your behalf. Your identity is in him. And if you would allow that reality to free you up, you could love and serve in new ways. And I do believe the way you work will make an impression on those around you. Work matters to God, and God matters to work. So I want to conclude our time. I want to reflect on this principle, that work matters to God and that God matters to work. And that your work, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, all of our work matters to God. Listen to this quote, and then we're going to do just a little exercise as we conclude. Listen to this quote by Robert Briner. He said, there should be no less support or attention for an earnest Christian young person who has been accepted to the Juilliard School of Music than for one going off to a theological seminary. The church needs writers, performers, artists, speakers, politicians, businessmen, businesswomen, and workers in every craft and trade. In God's eyes, there is no hierarchy. There certainly should not be in ours either. I think that's a truth that we need to embrace and remember, church. I think we've missed this. That all work matters to God. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to read just some broad categories of places and things that you might do that might be work. Again, remembering it's not necessarily what you get paid to do, but I'm going to use broad categories, and I'm going to ask you to associate in broad categories as well. And so as I read these, if I call that out, I just want you to stand and remain standing, okay? Can we do that? All right. Let's start. Since the Bible starts there, we're going to start there. Let's start with artists, musicians, creative people, advertising people, marketing people, maybe in television, print, radio, TV. If you're an artist in any of those creative realms, would you just stand? All right, remain standing. How about healthcare, pharmaceutical, biotech, medical, some facet of medicine or science? Would you stand? If you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, would you stand? Education, teacher, administrator, student, support person, anything in the education field, would you stand? If you work for the government, state, local, federal, maybe military, law enforcement, first responders, anyone, would you stand? Law, finance, accounting, tax, anything in those realms, stand. Maybe you're a parent, a caregiver, a mentor, a retiree, a friend, anyone who just invests their life in the lives of other people. Would you stand? Maybe you work in social services or nonprofit. It might be a ministry, it might be a secular nonprofit. Would you stand? Real estate, construction, architecture, transportation, plumber, electrician, anything in construction. Would you stand? How about the service industry, retail, food service, hairstylists, anything in the service industry, stand. Business, sales, technology, consulting, professional services, engineering, manufacturing, banking, anything else, would you stand? All right, I don't know if I'm missing anyone. I apologize if I am, but maybe we just didn't connect in our broad category. So if you're still seated and you're able, would you stand? Because here's the reality, even though we may not recognize it, God is using your work, whatever it is, whether I called it or not. Now, what I want to do is just take a minute and just look around. Look at the diversity of people and gifts and places where God has called us. All of this matters to God. All of this can be used for His glory and for the kingdom. And so what I'd like to do is just pray over us now as we conclude. I'm going to pray over us now. So would you just pray with me? Father, what a beautiful picture. You have arrayed a tapestry of gifts and vocations. Lord, thank you for the unique way that you've made every person in this room and the unique places that you've called them, the unique people that you've put in their paths. Lord, I pray that you would help us to see that our work matters to you, no matter how insignificant it seems to us. Maybe the world doesn't value what we do, but you do. So would you give us eyes to see that? May we see it through your eyes. That you created work, you created us to be workers, and it is good. So Lord, forgive us for discounting that. Maybe forgive us for thinking wrongly about that. Lord, thank you for those who are here who are just thriving where they are. They love what they're doing, and they just feel like it's perfect for them. Lord, I'm grateful. I rejoice in that. I know there are others here who work is hard. It's not what they would desire for themselves. So Lord, right now I'm just praying you would meet them in that. Would you walk with them in that, help them to understand that even in the midst of that you can use them. Lord, would you keep us from those dangers of idleness or idolatry? Help us be honest with ourselves just to know who we are and how you've made us and what we tend towards. Lord, make us people who are willing to repent. And Lord, more importantly than all, I pray that you would help us to realize, Lord, that our identity is not in what we do. Thankfully, we can rest. Our identity is in what Jesus has already done for us. So Lord, if there's some here today who don't know that, who have never embraced that truth, who have questions about that, Lord, would you stir in their hearts? For the rest of us, would you just drive that truth home? May it become real for us. May we be able to walk in it and to rest in it. And we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.